The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hey, it's Tony Messia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. We'd love it if you would sign up for our newsletter. That's kind of our bread and butter. It's the way we deliver smart, timely, and relevant information about our community. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is presented by Trinity Episcopal School, marking 25 years of creating scholars, nurturing spirituality, and embracing diversity in Charlotte's Center City. Trinity offers a unique K-8 curriculum with a focus on critical thinking, curiosity about the world around us, and service to the community. Learn more about the admission process for the 2025-2026 school year and register for an open house at tescharlotte.org. Today, I'm talking with Nate Negrin, president and owner of SouthernEEZ Landscaping. At the Ledger, we love talking with business owners on this podcast and for our newsletter. And I can tell you personally that as a small business owner myself, I enjoy talking to others about how they got into what they're doing, what their industry's like, how they're leading their teams, and how they confront the many challenges that business owners face. And I think our listeners and readers appreciate that as well. Now, SouthernEEZ and Nate are good ones to talk to. The company, which serves the Charlotte area with full-service landscaping and maintenance services, was just named to the Inc. 5000 list of the country's fastest-growing companies for the third straight year. Inc. magazine said that SouthernEEZ's three-year revenue growth was 75%, which I think is pretty impressive, given that this is a company that's been around since 2010. So Nate, welcome.
Great. It's good to be here.
So like I mentioned, I really enjoy talking to people in different industries. I mean, I personally have an understanding of the media industry as much as anybody can understand that industry. But it's always great to talk to people in different fields that I know nothing about. And I don't really know that much about landscaping other than, I have a yard. I have grass, it needs to get cut. That's about the extent of my understanding, but I'm looking forward to talking to you just about the landscaping industry, what some of the trends are, and sort of where SouthernEEZ fits into all of that. And speaking of different industries, before getting into landscaping, you were in a completely different industry. You were in the banking industry. You were at Bank of America for 11 years. You were a research analyst. You were in corporate investments. And then around 2015, you left and you bought SouthernEEZ, which, like I say, I think it was founded in 2010. What was your thinking of going from banking into landscaping?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. There is a backstory there that I'll kind of dive into quickly. I grew up sort of cutting lawns and doing landscape work and went to college thinking that I wanted to get into the landscape industry. I show up at school and I realize that I don't have to go to college necessarily to do that, and sort of open my eyes, if you will, or broaden my horizons a little bit. And at that point is where I moved into the agricultural business and worked for Cargill, and then went to work for Bank of America. So buying the business is sort of a fulfillment of a high school dream, if you will. So it's not quite out of nowhere. But at the same time, when I was working at Bank of America, we moved to Charlotte in 2007, obviously put down roots and enjoyed this town. This city is kind of our adopted home. And as I was at Bank of America, sort of looking for other opportunities, a little more entrepreneurial, sort of trying to scratch that itch from when I was younger, this business came up for sale. And it was small enough that it was not a huge financial risk. It was big enough that it was supposedly or theoretically worth quitting my job to go do full time. And so with a partner at the time, he and I sort of got the deal done and bought the business. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of stress, a lot of risk at the time. But, 9 years later, coming up on 10 years, it's obviously been worth it. I have built a nice business.
So tell me a little bit about sort of what you saw in the business then, and tell me a little bit about SouthernEEZ and what it is that you all do.
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first. So what we've built, or the business I've built, kind of revolves around relationships. When I say that, we do two things. Number one, we do landscape installation projects. Our projects typically revolve around custom luxury home builders and projects kind of in town. We also do work for the city of Charlotte, a bunch of right of way and other tree planting work that the city's doing. It's a great initiative that I've been able to be a part of. And then we also work for developers and general contractors building commercial properties as well. We'll come in, we'll provide the trees, the shrubs, the irrigation, the artificial turf, everything needed to sort of take the project from red clay and gravel to a finished product. The other side of our business, we do lawn maintenance. Our focus there is commercial contractual lawn maintenance for clients that own multifamily buildings, homeowners associations, commercial warehouses, strip centers. And we also do a little bit of municipal work as well for the city of Rock Hill and the city of Charlotte. What sort of attracted me to the business at the time was the person I bought the business from actually had contracts with the city of Rock Hill. And so as we were looking at this small business, it's called a micro business, to be honest, there were these couple contracts with the city of Rock Hill that were very attractive. 9 years later, we still have the same contracts. We've added others, obviously, since that time. But that's really what said, hey, man, there's something real here. This is reasonably large dollars, and we think there's a business to be built around, these contracts, both for the public sector and for the private sector property owners.
So what did you bring to it? I mean, you had, I know, an interest, in this industry. You had been in finance for a while. Having that finance background, what did you come in looking at that in a different way than somebody else might have? I mean, what, as a business, what were you looking at?
Yeah, so we looked at sort of the recurring revenue opportunity that was here and that is present in the industry. I came in thinking I kind of knew what I was doing. The business and buying a small business completely humbled me. So 4 years later, I sort of figured out at that point what I was doing. I just counted on the fact that my one internship in college would sort of educate me enough to be able to step into a business and grow it. But in all honesty, it really was 4 or 5 years of trial and error of working with clients, trying to do the right thing. And we started to find the grooves that I described earlier with good relationships, good clients, long-term properties. And I'll quickly say we did go into it certainly with kind of a Ferrari back office. We had a great sort of accounting system that we set up, a lot of kudos to my partner at the time. We also had a good operating system. The system's called Jobber, which now has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, plumbers, electricians, landscapers, all kinds of folks. And so it was probably one of the first people on that platform. And so that allowed me to automate everything, kind of do all of the back office work in a few hours each day. So that's kind of what I think I brought to it, is sort of a technology focus, a finance understanding, and that's allowed me to sort of drive things forward.
So you mentioned that when you first bought the business, that there were parts of it that you found humbling. Tell me a little bit about that. What was it that you weren't quite prepared for, or that was surprising, that really took you by surprise?
Yeah. Well, the first surprise was the second day I bought the business, and I asked everybody, all the employees, for their driver's licenses so I could send those to the insurance company. I was very excited to have insurance. And they said, oh, the seller didn't tell you none of us have driver's licenses. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was a thing. I don't know. Everyone I knew drove to work. And so it just kind of educated me at that point, kind of what's real in the world and kind of what you have to solve for. And the constraints went from, dragging cells to the right and trying to figure out how fast we could grow to the business, to what are the real problems here? And that's getting on site, doing quality work, safe operators, licensing, all the different things that are required to kind of run a real business. So that was the big surprise. The other thing that was humbling is just related is the labor market, right? Understanding who's doing this work. There were, like I said, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 employees at the time. And obviously in order to grow, I've got to figure out which one of these guys is doing good stuff, because I want more of that. And it took about a year to sort of find 3 or 4 or 5 more good guys to sort of complement the initial group once I found a driver to legally get them to the jobs.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of surprising, I think, when you go into business for yourself. Just, you have to wear a lot of different hats. I think even if you're coming into an established organization, there's still, you can't just say, okay, this department's responsible for that. I don't really understand what they're doing. I'm not going to get my hands dirty. You kind of need to have a hand in a lot of different parts of the operation that you might not really have any background in. And you don't have to be the expert necessarily in all of those fields, but it seems like you need to know something about them, right, in order to run the business. Probably one conception that people have of this business, and maybe this is just me, but I think a lot of people kind of look at it, and you look at a yard, or you look at a piece of property that needs to be maintained, and you say, well, gosh, how is the advancement in how you maintain a yard progressing? And I think you sort of mentioned, like, things, you had a view of it that was 15 years old. Had things really progressed? Is there new technology, I don't even know what it is, fertilizer, or new ways of doing things that were different than they were, in 2015 compared to 2000?
I'll answer that in 2 ways. Yes, there's definitely new technology and new sort of thoughts about how to do things. There's many facets. I'll name kind of 3 off the top of my head. Artificial turf is something we're seeing a lot of as people are trying to move into less water intensive environments. Stormwater runoff and control was another big one that's sort of evolved over the last 10 years. Before it was, we just let the stormwater go where it may. Now there's stormwater control measures and other things like that. And the next thing that I'd like to talk about is the cities kind of put in some regulations in terms of site trees and what's required because they have a canopy goal as well. So, those are three examples of the ever evolving sort of regulatory, but also best practice landscape because consumers are ultimately driving the aesthetics and whatnot related to that. The second way I'll answer that question is, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, but how you make your, tall grass short and just deal with it may be a lot different than what the expectations are for Ballantyne or Phillips Place or some other high-end property. So
they're definitely a lot different than my house.
Hey, I'm not trying to make any judgments or assumptions here. I just thought I'd throw it out there. So in order to get that sort of Augusta National, that's the pinnacle, obviously. There's a lot of inputs and sort of science and technology that go into it. So you can be as basic as you want or low impact, or you can be as sort of high impact and manicured as the client is desiring. So as I've learned over the last 9 years, I've gone from the Messina's front yard to, the Phillips Place or Ballantyne. I'm not going to say Augusta National, and kind of learn what techniques are there and what that cost is and how to deliver that kind of service.
We'll be right back to the conversation. But first, this episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast is presented by Trinity Episcopal School. Discover Trinity's K-8 advantage at tescharlotte.org.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the company as a business. As I mentioned, your company, SouthernEEZ, was just named to the Inc. 5000 list for the third year in a row. You're still, increasing your revenue. And just for those who might not be familiar, this is a list put out by Inc. magazine in which they look at your finances. I think over the last 3 years, I think you have to give them, partial tax returns or some sort of proof of your revenue. They look at how much it's grown from 2020 to 23. They require, for example, in 2020 that you have at least 100,000 in revenue, and that by 2023 you had at least 2 million in revenue. So they can sort of compare apples to apples across a lot of these companies. I mean, how do you grow in this industry? I mean, what's the secret sauce there?
Yeah. So I think the secret sauce, how have we grown, is figuring out what we do well and doing more of that, treating people right, and all that goes with that. So I'll answer that a little more specifically. Bigger picture, and I'll talk a little bit about the landscape industry and where we are as I've matured the business and sort of found some niches. There's a lot of bigger companies out there, and we have dedicated ourselves to being local to sort of Fort Mill, South Charlotte, and then we're growing from there as well. And what that means is we're trying to deliver high touch, personalized service where there's larger consolidators in the industry that are offering less and less of that personalized service that maybe existed 10 or 15 years ago. So I see us as a little bit like a mid-major, like a Davidson competing in the Sweet 16 every year in the March Madness tournament, right? In the NCAA tournament. We've got to compete against UNC and Duke and Kentucky and all these big companies, but at the same time, we don't quite have the student body or the resources necessarily. But we put ourselves out there, we're smart, we're professional, and we're going to follow up and execute. So that's really kind of how I've been able to drive the growth in the business here.
Yeah. And what does the future for growth look like? It would strike me that a business like this would be hard to scale up because you do have such a personal touch, and you can't just, it's not like you're have some cryptocurrency company or you're devising some app that is very technology based where you might be able to grow, pump a bunch of money into marketing, and you don't really need employees. For what you're doing, you actually need employees on the ground doing the work. You need people who are really good and trained very well to interact with the customers. It seems like compared to other companies, it might be hard to kind of keep on expanding. But what do you see as the future of the growth of the company?
Yeah. So, bigger picture, our industry is not really perceived very well. I think you implied that earlier, kind of the kid down the street, that kind of thing.
I mean, no disrespect. No
disrespect. I just wanted to lay the groundwork a little bit and then talk about what we're doing. Big picture, industry is not perceived very well. Apparently we're, looking at the National Association of Landscape Professionals, the NALP is the national organization, done some studies and whatnot. We're kind of in line with trucking companies and other sort of basic service industries. Whereas I would assert, and you've also asserted as well, that it's a bunch of passionate professionals who are green industry pros. They know how plants and grass and water and runoff and engineering and all these things work. And so it is very difficult to find those folks. And we're working to sort of bring people off the street with a passion for that, or people who have gone to college, horticulture programs or engineering programs or other sort of programs like that, and sort of teach them how we do business. I'm not going to say we're perfect or I'm perfect, but I know how I interact with my clients on a landscape construction project. I've got 3 other guys that work for me now that also know how we do things. And the goal is to just sort of do it over and over again and consistently. On the lawn maintenance side of the business, again, it is hard to scale, but we've got some great core team members who know how we go to market, how we do business. We've got a great sort of account management team now that knows how to treat people right and follow up and crisp, clear communication. Those are other things that are just key wins. So the last thing I'll say is it's all about people and investing in good people. I've sort of modeled and created a little bit of a flywheel, and now it's all about plugging in good people behind me to keep running this thing.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it seems like the things that you're talking about, like communicating with customers, doing a good job, doing what you say you're going to do, getting talented people, that these would be things that would be kind of obvious to succeed in business. But I think you're sort of implying that a lot of your competitors out there or other people in the market are, maybe that's not necessarily the standard practice in the landscaping industry. And I don't want to put you in a position of throwing shade at anybody in particular, but we can talk about that offline. But who do you see as the competitor? I mean, you're running your own race. I'm sure you're doing things the way you want to do them, but just for the wider scope of this industry, I mean, are those not touchstones of every company?
I would say it's standard in the industry, but at the same time, it becomes harder and harder to execute. I think I implied a little bit earlier, looking at our industry in general. Let's say there's 20 competitors here in town that I compete against. 15 or 16 of those are owned by sort of outside capital. There's a lot of roll-up activity going on, to use the word private equity, but that's the buzzword in the landscape conferences the last couple of years. What that means is that their goal, and I think the goal of any business, is to scale, but it's hard to scale when you're not driven necessarily by an owner-operator, CEO, kind of in my world. And so what we've tried to do is remain true to that, continue to invest. So it's an investment as well. I think my coverage of clients, at least what I pay to have people, account managers, salespeople, other folks like that covering our clients, is a little bit higher ratio than maybe what would make sense for somebody else down the street. Maybe that results in a little bit higher price, but at the same time, I would expect my team to be sort of covering those clients in a superior way, which may not be the business model that is working for someone who deals on a little bit more wholesale basis.
It's interesting you mentioned private equity, because I've talked to business owners across a number of different industries, from pet care to veterinary medicine to plumbing, several others, and they all talk about dry cleaners, where private equity is coming in, buying up a lot of their competitors, putting in a bunch of money and sort of running it from afar, but maybe missing out on some of those opportunities to have that interaction with the client and that locally owned, personal service. Is that sort of what you're seeing?
Yeah. And I continue to see that. And I think it comes in waves. So there's consolidation, and everyone kind of says, okay, what do we have here? And they look at their businesses and they sort of redouble, digest, and then they're able to come back to market and aggressively go after new business. So as those waves happen, we kind of watch for that in the market and do what we can when there's churn or when there's turnover, and try to, address those clients and call on them at that time and deliver, like I said, a consistent product. The last thing I'll say about our industry is it's very well spread out, right? It's not very consolidated. So when I talk about 20 companies, maybe there's 25 in the Charlotte area, which seems like a big number, and they're all pretty material companies. So there's plenty of market share out there for folks to take advantage of. The last thing I'll talk about growth, and I wanted to mention this, people are continuing to come to the Carolinas. Charlotte, I think, is really in a sweet spot in that regard, talking to folks around the country. The statistic that you threw out, I believe, was 10% growth in the number of units in the next 3 years. And I think we might be a little way into that. But the point is, that's money that's already been spent. It's projects that are coming out of the ground. And that doesn't sort of account for the interest rate spike, if you will, that happened last year, and a little bit of a hiccup in that production line. So the 10% growth is key. The units that you mentioned, I don't remember exact count, but the idea is there's a certain number of landscape budget per door. So multiply that times the number of units, and that's, a net $5 to $10 million growth in the market here in Charlotte, just for the landscape services associated with some of those multifamily housing
Yeah, there's definitely big growth, in apartment complexes. I think we're sort of coming out of this big building boom of the last couple of years. Some of that, the starts I know are slowing down, but the number that's coming online, I think this year and early next year, I think is supposed to be quite high. And so it seems like it's probably a good place to be if you're in your line of work. Just want to ask you, what's your thinking as you've grown this company over the last almost decade? What's your thinking on leadership? I mean, what sort of things do you do to lead your people? I mean, I'm guessing, that your number of employees has grown. You're doing things now that you didn't do probably when you started. How do you lead through that growth?
That's a great question. Obviously, employees is what we do. It's a service industry that we're delivering. And I'm leading through that by trying to, every time we hire somebody, hire them for that next role and helping them to grow and continue to hire better and better people. So I think the big picture of what I found is when I bought the business and there was 6 or 7 employees, I didn't really have an impetus or an ability to hire somebody that was experienced, that brought a lot of perspective and other things to the job. But as we've grown, it's given us the budget to hire better and better, more experienced folks, those with just a lot more gravitas, if you will. And so that's really been one of my leadership things, is to find people who are either experts in the industry, experts from outside the industry, and bring them in, teach them what we do, and sort of grow them. I've always led from the front. It's becoming harder and harder now. It seems like I lead a team of managers instead of leading a team of landscapers. But at the same time, it's just as fun. So surrounding myself with good, smart people.
How many folks do you have now? You started with 6 or 7, you said?
Oh man, probably 50 or 60.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's a herd for sure.
That's great. I was out the other day taking my dog for a walk, and a neighbor one street down had one of these robotic mowers on his lawn, and the dog starts going crazy, barking at it. No human around that I could see, but you can just imagine. And it's almost the same with autonomous vehicles, where the technology isn't quite there, but everybody says it's going to be soon. And I'm imagining it's the same in your industry.
That's right. Yeah, we've got Roombas for residential yards, if you will. But in terms of, sort of all the landscape work being done for you, not quite there yet, but it's coming. And there's certainly some, as you would imagine, it's going to be incremental. There's going to be some things that, we look back on 3 years ago and say, how do we not do our jobs without that? And so that's pretty exciting, but not a sea change. It's a pretty basic industry in that regard. It's definitely labor heavy, and it's a real focus on people and developing people and finding the right sort of people.
I do hear your point about, when people say landscaping, I think their mind instantly goes to, the people who maybe didn't choose it for a career, who are out here just doing it, as opposed to professionals. A lot of the universities now have very good turf management programs. You think of the people that are in charge of the fields, football fields, that, to the extent there are still grass football fields, making sure that those are great. I'm guessing it's sort of the same thing, that if you're, sort of bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, if you're a Phillips Place or a Ballantine, you want the best, right? You want your place looking great, and you need professionals to do that. And there are people that are well educated, that are, choosing to be in this industry. I sort of liken it a little bit. I used to cover manufacturing, and you would hear a lot from manufacturing people about, we need more people in manufacturing. We need to be articulating that this is a legitimate and worthwhile career choice for people to go into manufacturing, or to be welders, or whatever it is. That not everybody can sit in an office all day. Not everyone's built for that. But for some reason, our society seems to value that a lot more than working outside. And there are a lot of great careers that you can have being active outside. This sounds like one of them.
That's right. And that's where we try to offer folks and meet them where they are. Some folks are here just for a season to try to earn some money and to get themselves from point A to point B. Some folks make a career out of it, and we try to find all those people and like I said, meet them where they are. The other thing that I think about as well, you're making a great point, is manufacturing did have a lot of, over time, highly technical and highly skilled jobs as they increase the productive complexity of what they do. And I think you're going to see more and more of that here as well in the landscape industry. So we're kind of preparing for that. And then finally, to your point, great feeder programs are based on the golf course management and some of those other sports and turf fields that really drive the science and drive improved quality and efficiency with chemicals and water usage and turf species and things like that. So those are some real interesting areas of our industry.
Okay. So one final question. Do you have any advice for people and their lawns? Other than, call SouthernEEZ and get a quote. But do you have any advice for people as they're approaching their lawns or thinking about their own lawn maintenance close to their homes?
Gosh, so we don't do residential lawn maintenance. It's just something we're not in that market. It's a different animal. We're not quite set up for the service there. But as I advise people or talk to folks around town, I say find a local owned, thoughtful chemical or fertilizer program to help keep the weeds down. It can be organic, it can be all chemical, I don't know, whatever. But the point is find a good person to do that and then mow it consistently and you'll have a happy and healthy lawn. So that's always the advice that I give. The last thing is that it takes labor and it is a function of labor. So if you've got the time, use it and spend it and go out there and do it. If you don't have the time, definitely hire someone because you'll find yourself behind by the time you get to this time of year and you'll be regretful.
All right. That sounds like a good place to end it. Nate, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, that's a wrap. To our listeners, thank you for listening. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is produced by Lindsey Banks.
This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is presented by Trinity Episcopal School. Your family belongs at Trinity, the only independent K-8 school in Charlotte's Center City. Applications for the 2025-2026 school year are now open. Visit tescharlotte.org.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.